How many people did it take to make this record? How many factories did it take? How many processes? How many specialists in the chain did it take to make one record? That's what we're going to look at today. This is part 2, episode 2 of the record business. My name is Dustin Blocker. I'm the co-founder and co-owner of Hand Drawn Records and Hand Drawn Pressing out of Dallas, Texas. We primarily live in the world of vinyl record manufacturing, and it started out as a record label back in 2011 with myself starting off as a touring musician back all the way in the year 1999. I'm also the president and co-founder of the VRMA, the Vinyl Record Manufacturers Association. That's an association that works throughout Americas and Europe, and it's throughout this entire supply chain. So a lot of the folks we're talking about today are going to be not just the record pressing plants, but all the different factories that are in the chain. But what we're really interested in today is how many factories did it take to make this? How many people did it take that work within those places to make these records? And how long did it take? That's multiple facilities, multiple specialists in the chain. And we're going to be looking at why it takes weeks and months. I think as the entire platform has matured, what we see is that artists and labels expect the records to be faster and faster. Our pushback is always the faster and faster that it is, the more issues that can happen. I'm not saying that there's always issues if you speed through the process, but typically more can happen because it is very delicate. The manufacturing process itself is flawed. Many people in the chain and many different processes within those companies that make it very complex. So that's what we're going to look at today. If you're an artist, musician, record label, band manager, a collector of vinyl records, and you're just interested in the process, we're going to dispel myths, talk about it in a concrete way. Let's walk through exactly how a record is made. This first part is going to be about the audio. Let's go ahead and fast forward to the mixing engineer. The band has recorded their entire record. A mixing engineer now mixes it to have levels per track that sound good to the end listener. Now it has to go to what is called a mastering engineer. So step one in this process is going to be mastering. Vinyl record manufacturing has different mastering requirements than typical requirements that go out for digital audio. Typically, what a mastering engineer on the digital side is trying to do is make it so that they have a flat EQ so that they can do what's called a flat cut at the cutting engineer level, which is the next step. If you look at a waveform on a computer screen, the super high highs can cause tracking to be an issue later on in the record playback process, and that is going to be the same thing with the super low lows. Frequency is the key here, and compression. In the CD days, they called it the loudness wars, and so compression was key, meaning you wanted to jack up the volume of mastering so that on a CD it would play back super loud. That causes a lot of problems when it comes to the vinyl record format. So what's going to be super important in vinyl records? Time per side is number one. So what is recommended is that audio is under 22 minutes typically per side. Some cutting engineers can go above that to 24 minutes. What happens though, you are trading something off when it comes to the vinyl format. So the longer a side is, the quieter the record has to be to fit that much music on a side. All right, so you see the micro grooves there, and you see the bands in between. That's track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4. I count 5 tracks. I'm looking at it backwards on that side. Let's see if I'm right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nope, I'm wrong. It's 6 tracks. So there's 6 tracks. I couldn't quite see from the angle I'm sitting at. So there's a band in between, and each track before that band, that's track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's not really how many tracks are on a side, it's how much time is on those tracks. So that's going to be the most important part, is getting that right. So you have the actual length itself, but it's also how those tracks are ordered, okay? If you listen to when vinyl was in its quote unquote heyday in the 1970s, what you'd hear is the bangers at the top. The tracks are trying to get on radio. Tracks 1, 2, and 3 are going to be your big monster tracks, loud, big drums, all that kind of stuff. And then if you notice, as you get closer to the center label, the tracks become more ballads, right? So you have Quieter tracks, less production. Maybe you don't have as much drums. Maybe you do get into the ballad side. That's for a typical, what you'd call rock record, a pop record. Those variations change when you're talking about classical or jazz. But the big idea here is that as the cutting engineer is cutting in one spiral groove, they're cutting this entire side, they have less space to work with. And so the grooves get tighter. When grooves get tighter, that means the needle can jump out of the groove easier. So you want to make sure that you're tracking appropriately. Okay, so I spoke a little bit about tracks, but then also the volume itself. So if you are an artist that has more than 22 minutes aside, and you're getting up there to 24 minutes, maybe even 25 minutes, you're going to have to consider the volume is going to suffer. The cutting engineer is going to have the volume lower, cutting at lower decibels, to fit all the music on without skipping. The big key of the cutting engineer, they do not want anything skipping. Once they make their cut, they're done, okay? So any kind of rework, oh, I didn't like this track being on the side, or I want to move it up and change the order of it, that's a whole new side. That's a lot of cost. That's a lot of time. So they don't want the artist to have to incur that, and they have a workload themselves, and they don't want to have to go back and redo work if they don't have to. So note that volume, this is how it's been explained to me by multiple cutting engineers throughout many, many years. Volume side, a record to record should not be the key. We get pushback sometimes from people who get their test presses and they say, record was not as loud as record Y in my collection. I want it to be as loud as the other one. That's not how this works. They are independent of one another. So the side A and side B and C and D, if you had a double record, should have the same volume, because a record itself, and maybe it doesn't have to, but I would say that it's better if a record side A and you flip it back over, that the songs are pretty close to the same volume, overall volume level, side A to side B, side C to side D, etc. But that is not the case. I'm not going to have record X does not need to sound like record Y in my collection. That's not how it works at all. It's independent. They're independent of one another. These are choices made by the cutting engineer to make a great sounding record. So what happens if the volume comes down? What's the problem? Well, okay, if it's independent, it's just a quieter record, I can just turn it up on my turntable. I can turn it up on my amp to make it louder, and then everything's fine. The issue is you get closer and closer to what's called floor noise. So floor noise is there's a floor when the needle is going across these grooves. There's an actual floor to it that if it gets too low, you're just going to start hearing a hum or a buzz. So you're going to have a constant noise or a crackle or anything that's not supposed to be there is going to be there because you essentially got too quiet. Needles are popping out of the grooves and the playback sucks, and you said this record skips and I need to return it. And if the volume is too quiet, you're cranking it up so much, you're getting a lot of surface noise, a lot of scratching. So if you have too many songs or too many tracks on a side, that's usually not a good thing. And you're going to have to really kind of over communicate if you think that's the case. If the plant or customer service rep that's working with you gets long sides, they absolutely need to know this, and they should be talking to you, and they do, and say, hey, you need to cut a track, or think about putting these other tracks maybe on a digital only download, or put them only on Spotify, something like that, for your fans to be bonus tracks, because they just literally can't fit. Or you can extend into a double LP. That can be more expensive. It's not double the cost to do a double LP, but it can be 25, 30% more expensive to do a double LP versus a single LP. One more note on that. If you have only 3 sides worth of material, so let's say, you have 3 sides that are 15 to 18 minutes a piece because the math didn't quite work, there is something pretty cool. I can pop some examples up on the video here of what are called etches. Etches are a really, really cool way to get extra artwork across, and it's made separately from the cutting engineers. But then the next step we're about to talk about, which is plating, it's all done there. And so this artwork is actually duplicated just like the grooves are duplicated in the hot wax. The artwork is actually duplicated so you can make as many as you want, and it's going to look identical and it looks really cool. If you decide to do an etch, the examples you'll see, opaques, you want to do it on opaque, the dark record, black is the best, or a dark color, because it shows a lot better. If it's a clear or translucent record, it typically won't shine through, or you're kind of looking through seeing this cool artwork, but it's muddy because you're seeing the grooves on the other side. One other kind of cool thing that can be done typically on most manufacturing plant floors currently is you can have no center label. So if you do artwork on one side, you can have that side without a center label so the artwork can kind of go all the way to where the label is. And that's not always recommended because there can be some sticking that happens during the pressing process and the record gets stuck and it kind of damages everything and it's much slower and it's a big problem. So it's not always the case that you can't have center labels, but you should check with the plant that you work with and make sure that that is something that you can do. All right, so let's go into the cutting of the record itself. We're back to the cutting engineer. So cutting engineer is doing exactly what the name sounds like. They're cutting a record. They're cutting a lacquer in real time on a record lathe. So a record lathe, which the ones that are still in existence today, primarily in the 70s and early 80s, these lathes came from. And so there are multiple record lathes that cut lacquers on the planet. There is a company out of Australia that makes a new lathe. And then there are some DMM, direct metal mastering lathes, that are in Europe. So DMM is a thing. There's all kinds of rabbit holes you can go onto when you're talking to different audiophiles. What sounds better, lacquer versus DMM? Since we've done very few projects as DMM, typically what we do is all lacquer cut. We love the warmth of it. We love the sound of it, but it's all created equal. It's usually in the hands of, or the ears, I should say, and hands of the cutting engineer, and how good they are at their craft between the lacquer and the DMM and knowing how to transfer audio correctly, depending on the style of music onto either one of those. So not gonna spin up any controversy, what's better, lacquers or DMMs. I'm just saying that we use lacquers and we have done some DMM. And I would say for the most part, I could flip a coin. And if I didn't know which one was which, the Pepsi versus Coke challenge, I might not even know which one was lacquer and which was deep. So there's that. You have the lathe itself, super important. This is a big, huge machine, very expensive. No vibration can happen around it or near it. So it has to have all these technical components that even on this old technology still exists to make sure there's no vibrations. And then there's a whole daisy chain of pumps and tools that the cutting engineer uses getting any kind of source material into the lathe itself. We've been walked through a bunch from different engineers. I am not an audio engineer by trade, and so most of it goes over my head, and so I'm not going to pretend that I even understand most of it, but I do understand at a layman's level how it gets from point A to point B. And the next part that's very important in the lathe is the cutting stylus. So just like you have a stylus that plays back your record, and there's different levels of cost associated with how good a different stylus can be on your playback system. Conical is more rounded. Then you have the sharper tip, and those are a little more high end. The same thing is true on the cutting stylus. So what is making the record on the lathe, what's cutting it, you can have rubies or diamond cutting heads, and those have different levels of quality, and different cutting engineers are going to say this one's better than that one. But the big takeaway here is that it's a very expensive piece of equipment with this very expensive cutting styli. It's cutting one big long groove. Then you have excess material that comes off the lacquer. That material is getting sucked out by a vacuum tube into a different cartridge within the lathe and gets pulled away. The debris gets pulled away so that you have a clean lacquer. The lacquer itself is a very fragile process. There's one lacquer company in the world that's out of Japan. They have been opening their doors to more and more folks to come visit. So they have 2 facilities now, is what I've been told. I've never been there. And it's clearly a very large operation because it supplies the entire planet with enough lacquers to make all the different titles that you see on the shelf. Very cool company, and has been doing it for a very long time. Apollo was out of the US, and they actually burned down during COVID. COVID hit, and right before it hit, about a month and a half before, I was on vacation with my family, and I got a call from some larger publications saying, hey, this fire hit. Is the world out of lacquers? Is the vinyl record on this one precipice of a singular problem in the supply chain, meaning like it's too fragile because there's no redundancy? Is the whole thing going to now fall apart? It was starting to grow pretty large at that point, not as big as it is today, but it was still growing quite significantly for the music industry. and it's like, oh no, there's not going to be any lacquers. Are we all out of business? Every plant on the planet, besides DMM plants, are we all out of business? Thankfully, the folks in Japan, they stepped up, added more lines, added more capacity. What is a lacquer? It is simply a metal disc that has a hole punched into it. After it goes through a curtain of lacquer material, lacquer is kind of like a nail polish. You put it on, it's softer and it gets harder, but it's never super hard. Just like you can take off nail polish, the lacquer itself is tough enough, but it's not tough enough for the end use, which is vinyl. So a vinyl record is made of what is called like PVC, polyvinyl chloride. So a lacquer is not that. It's a special formula, kind of going back to the Coke thing. There's lots of colas out in the world, but Coke has its special formula. The lacquer manufacturers actually have this one, a unique proprietary formula that is able to coat the record. There's a big word that there's going to be more lacquer manufacturers in the near future, but that is yet to be seen. So you have the lacquer itself. It's a softer material. It can withstand transit from Japan to wherever it's going. And then those are stored at a cutting facility. And then they're opened up, and a big, basically a sheet is over top of it to protect it, and it comes open. One lacquer per side. So you only have your one lacquer, you have one side of the lacquer that you can use, and the lacquer is larger than the finished record. So it's a 14-inch lacquer, which produces a 12-inch record. These are extremely fragile, or can be played back a few times, but then degradation happens pretty quickly. So what happens most of the time is that a cutting engineer cuts it, and then they needed to get it to a cutting facility, either in-house or off-site, within 24, 48 hours is pushing it. They need to get it over there to the plating facility, which is going to do the next step. Galvanics, electroplating is going to take this lacquer and make it so that it can be used until that thing is destroyed. The reason being, lacquers are soft material, and once the grooves are cut in, any kind of heat can allow those walls to start collapsing. The groove walls is what I'm talking about, can collapse, but ideally directly out of a box, scheduled and silvered as quickly as possible. A silver material, you spray it on like a paint booth ad. If you're painting a car, you see a clean booth, and then they're spraying it with a paint. Same kind of idea. The plating facility affixes into a booth, and they have a gun, and it's spinning this lacquer, and they're spraying it, and it silvers the entire disc, and now you have what looks like a platinum record. It's a completely silver record, but it's flat and it's large, because remember, it's 14 inches, not 12 inches. They then take that off. They do some other processes to make sure that the silver is on there correctly, and then they go into the next steps of electroplating. So they're going to then separate the silver from the lacquer itself. That lacquer is now discarded. That lacquer is no good anymore. It goes away, and you have this silver representation of your record. And father, mother, children, that is the internal speak of what is the next steps to make records into the manufacturing process. So a father is going to be the metal negative. Okay, so it's the negative, or the opposite of the lacquer cut. The mother is going to then be positive. Okay, stick with me, positive. And then the stamper is a production tool. So then the stamper becomes a negative again. So you have to have the negative, it goes positive, negative like that, because at the end, what you're doing is you're stamping hot plastic, hot PVC with the negative, so that when it opens up, you got a positive again. That allows it to track correctly. Father, mother, stamper. Father's going to be what's called three-step plating. Meaning you have this as your metal master that can be stored for as long as it lasts. That could be decades. The mother, if you're doing two-step plating, the mother is your master. Try not to be too confusing, but just bear with me. The mother's a master, and there is no father. And then you have stamper, which that one is the one that goes to the plant. So the stamper goes to the record pressing plant. Those get destroyed every time. The mother, you can get 10,000 records off of one mother. So you can get 10 stamper sets off of one mother, and each stamper can get 1,000 records. And then a father, you can get 100,000 records. And so the math just goes backwards like that. So if you do three-step plating, effectively what you're saying is that we think we can make 100,000-ish or under number of records off of this one master. We don't want to go back and get it recut by a cutting engineer we want to have this record or this cut be our primary. That's why in the older days, in the 70s, you have different cuts of huge records because those are over 100,000 units have been produced. So as they got to 200,000, 500,000, a million units are produced, multiple cuts, different people probably around the planet cutting these. So the sound will be different because it was a person on a lathe cutting a record that went to a plating facility that then mass produced these records at scale. And so that's why you have different cuts. That's why some records are more valuable than others. If you're looking on Discogs or you're wondering why this one is rated differently than the other, it's primarily due to that. And there could be some other things like packaging as well, but primarily it's there, where it was made, when it was made, who cut it. So there's that. All right, so now we have got our way up to the stampers. Stampers are going to go to the pressing facility. All right, so the music is now ready. Now we're going to need the material. So we have PVC. I've spoke about it a couple times. PVC, polyvinyl chloride. Polyvinyl chloride, and it has agents within it, polymers within it that are a little different than PVC that is made for other parts of different industries. So PVC, primarily piping. You hear pipes in the ground that are buried. That is a very hard form of PVC. So it's a very, very hard material. So it's polyvinyl chloride. So polymers are mixed in there, and that's super hard. The softest side of that is typically in medical. So blood bags are one of the biggest ones. Really, syringes, anything like that, you'll see it's all PVC. So the medical industry and the piping industry, flooring, roofing materials, the wraps that go around electrical wires, that's PVC, and some are softer, some are harder, and that's all about the blending materials. So the reason I bring that up when it comes to records is especially for what is going to be compounded to make a black record versus a clear record versus a translucent red record versus an opaque green record. Then you get into things like splatters, you get into things like 50-50 splits, kind of the higher end manual work that costs a lot more to produce, and the fans like because it's super funky and unique, and each one's different. Those are all different compounds. And at the plant level, they have to know how to use those compounds appropriately. And what that means is they have to know how to heat and cool them appropriately to make them work within their specific record press to make a flat, quiet record that doesn't have a lot of surface noise. One big help that didn't exist about 10 plus years ago is the compounders of the PVC did not have at their ready ways to make colored material that did not create a lot of surface noise for records. So whereas they could make them red, they could make them green, they could make them whatever, they inherently, especially the clear or more translucent records, had more surface noise. So they had a lot of crackle, a lot of pop. Fast forward to today, the compounders at the PVC plants have gotten much, much better. They are highly specialized in this area. Their expertise is how do we make great compound that can run through these plants and also make it super quiet so that the press operator is not just spending all their time battling PVC. They're spending their time focused on making good records at a high clip so they can hit timelines for the artists. So the way that they were able to do that was pigmentation. So the way it was explained to me by a good friend who is a compounder who owns large compounding PVC operators on the planet, he was stating that the easy way to think of it, again, going to the car analogy, is pigmentation that was made for paint. Paint on cars has got much better, much harder, chips less, it stays longer, its color fast longer on vehicles. You don't have as many issues with paint in the auto industry. They took some of that technology and brought it in the pigmentation because they needed to be super fine. So the micro level of the pigmentation, the color itself, the dyes, the things that go into the polymers have to be broken down at such a fine level. They weren't able to do that many years ago and definitely decades ago. So that's why records just used to be black, even though colored PVC has existed for a long period of time. So there's a complication with that. And what's the operator to do at the plant level? They need to know how to work with all those different materials. And most of their time and energy, the press operator, is spent dialing in temperatures, okay? An extruder superheats these PVC pellets. They go into a big hopper. They get melted down into an extruder. The extruder has a large screw into it, and it is extruding the material up the screw, and then it's coming out of the extruder like a toothpaste consistency, and it's going into what's called a pre-mold. A pre-mold is the size of kind of a hockey puck, so a lot of people call it a puck or a biscuit, and it's pre-forming, so that tube of material is pre-forming into a hockey puck size. When it fills up that cup large enough and has enough material, the cup opens up, and then the puck is transported into the record press along with the center labels. The center labels are paper. They're highly specialized paper. It has to be made by a specialized printer, and they have to be able to withstand a couple hundred degrees in the record press without discoloring. So the puck is in the middle. The paper is transported on either side of the puck. Side A is the top, side B is the bottom. A big metal piece comes down, a rod comes down and holds it. We call it the pin, and it holds the puck and the center labels in place during the pressing process. So it transports into the record press. The record press is open. The stampers, side A is on the top, side B is on the bottom, is already affixed to these molds within the record press with a collar. They transport in, the center pin drops, holds it in place. It has to drop exactly in the middle of the center label, and it has to go through the top of the record mold and then into the bottom mold. So the top mold is completely open so the pin can pass through it, and the bottom mold actually has a stopping point with a bushing that holds the stamper onto the record press itself. So the two things that hold the stamper onto the record press, the collar goes around the sides, and then a bushing holds it up in the middle. So it goes through the bushing at the top, through the paper, through the puck, through the paper, into the bottom mold, holds it in place and does not move. Then the press closes around the center pin and around that hot plastic and the center labels, and then it squeezes outwards. So the pressure, the compression molding, is the puck expanding outwards as it's compressed in the record press. What's happening inside the record press? Super hot heat is typically around 300 degrees, and then super chilled water right around 100 degrees is all happening within a 30 to 32 second window of time. So from the mold opening, the PVC being extruded, into the pre-mold opening, into the record press, center pin dropping, press squeezing out the material, super heat, super cold, opening it up, a swing arm coming in and grabbing, or an operator grabbing, either way, pulls that record, dropping it onto a cutting plate. The cutting plate then spins with a knife that is also superheated, so it's heated by electricity. That knife block drops down and cuts a perfect edge so that you don't have sharp edges. If you can see, this one does not have a sharp edge, does not cut my finger, feels really good, nice and flat. That means that the operator did their job. They made sure that the knife block was sharp. They made sure it was super hot. In that whole portion of pressing, again, going back to temperatures, if it's even off by a quarter of a second or a half second in either the heating or the cooling, or how fast the material was extruded, or how fast the press held itself closed, or how long it held itself closed to when it opened, dwell time is what that's called. All those little parts of the process can either be a really good record or a really bad record. Very, very close. So these operators do not get to just start working a record press day one when they get hired by a record pressing plant. It's a lot of man hours, lots of study goes into it, lots of training goes into it. And it's also, frankly, a lot of trial and error. So you can teach somebody how to do something over and over, but until they really do it themselves, it's over a long period of time with different materials and different records, it can be tricky. One more trick of the trade for the press operator themselves, those stampers can really cause a problem too. So the quality of the stamper, which seems like it shouldn't matter, but it does, how thick those stampers are, beyond just if they have any issues like pock marks or scratches or anything that would be left over. I'm talking about just the quality of the stamper, how long it can hold up under pressure within the record press, how many times you can run a record through it. All that is contingent upon it being done correctly on the plating side, and then also cared for at the record pressing plant. What I'm trying to get across is that The fragility of the process is all these experts in different places, even if they're in the same building, because some pressing plants do have all this in the same building, cutting, plating, and pressing. The fragility of it needs to be stated because that is the primary reason the turn times can extend. Because if anyone in that chain does any, and I'm not talking a big problem, a little bitty problem, a tiny little problem that they can't see because it is, you can't see something that you need to hear. So a cutting engineer might do something that they were unaware of that then translates to plating, that translates to the press. The press operator then runs it, can't see a problem in the metal stamper. They run a record, they then hand it internally to their audio QC. Then that person flags the issue. This has some pops on it. This has something wrong. This has a surface noise, whatever. Now they have to start back over, right? Either you go back and get a mother or father check. Hey, was this on that original one or was this transferred onto a stamper? Because the stamper is the problem, but the mother's great. Or does the mother have a problem and it has to go back and be cut again by the cutting engineer? That can be weeks of problems. So customers all the time, hey, I need my record. I have a tour. I have a show. In a perfect world, we can say, yes, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. We got you. No problem. Let's go. Things happen. Some of the delays can be from the artist, the graphic designer, approval times, test presses being approved. Other issues can just happen internally. And now the customer service rep or the plant needs to then communicate to the artist, and they're going to have to communicate, hey, this went wrong. Now, if it's communicated well, typically, the artist or client is happy with that because they're like, okay, I at least have some answers versus no one talking to me for 8 weeks, which is a big no-no. So again, we'll get into that later, but I do want to state it is more complex than it does seem. All right, so we talked all about the record press itself, the trimming. Well, now we're on to the next little stage within the plant, and we have trimmed off the excess flash. So we stated that when the compression molding happens, the puck expands outwards and now it has like an odd shape to it. That cutting block cuts off that excess. It's called flash. That flash gets recycled, chopped up and made into new records at the plant. That is called post-industrial waste. And that should not go into a dumpster. It should be in the plant, chopped back up in a granulator, reused in the process. That is called recycling. The other thing that happens is after they're cooled, if they don't pass audio checks, the center label, which is paper, gets punched out, and then the record gets chopped back up in the same granulator that the flash does. And now you have huge bins that can weigh several tons full of regrind material. That is what has been marketed lately. You might see Eco Blend, which is different than Eco Vinyl. Eco Blend just means recycling. And it's a good note for the artist to understand. It's also a good note for the fans. Here's the big piece of this. Virgin material typically does not sound as good as regrind with virgin material. So 100% virgin record, meaning that the PVC came from the supplier and that was what was ran directly in the record press and made you a finished record, usually can sound pretty good. After a record's been ran and the flash got cut up and that stuff got granulated, put back in and then got placed back in with virgin material, it just sounds better. Some of those polymers we spoke about a little bit earlier get melted down more, and it's kind of like black magic. I don't have any other way to explain it other than it sounds better when you use granulated material or recycled material with your virgin, but also pure, just 100% regrind can sound great too. Again, eco mix, whatever you want to say. The piece of that is it is possible. There's contaminants because it sits out on the plant floor. There's dust in the air. Dust falls in there, and it can cause surface noise issues like that if it's not treated correctly. So at the plant level, they need to protect that, that regrind, basically, use it in a pretty efficient timeline, not letting it sit around for months. I mean, some dust isn't going to really do much, but if it's sitting out there for 5 months, 6 months, debris kind of getting in this open bin of material, it is always possible that it can cause problems. Okay, so it's cooled. So now you have records being cooled. So they were super hot. We talked about the record press being, 300 plus degrees. Now it's in a big cooling stack and it's cooled for X amount of hours, typically 4 hours, sometimes up to 8 hours, before it goes to the next people in the chain, which are the quality control folks. Now they are visually inspecting each record at a time. They're looking at each side. They do a visual check like this. They pull it off. They look at both and center label them correctly. Is there any issues on the sides? Or is there anything I see? No. Boom. 1. Do that 1,000 times, 2,000 times a day, 3,000 times a day. It is a lot for one person. So there's a team of people that are doing visual inspections. There's another team of people at the record pressing plant doing listening. So during the pressing itself, and it takes hours, we said they took about 30 seconds a record. So multiply how many records you did or you wanted in a run. So 500 units times 30 seconds, that's how long it takes. That's how many hours it's in operation. The pressing engineer and the quality assurance person who works alongside them most of the time is listening to, it depends, it varies by plant. Sometimes every 40 records, sometimes every 60 records. They're pulling it off, listening to the beginning, listening to the end of each side, and usually spot checking in the middle, and then visually seeing, are there any imperfections I see in this disc? Can you see it if you hold it in the light? You can see different things. You go, okay, that could be a problem. I see some pot marks. Well, let's go ahead and flag this for the operator to stop running it, look at it, see if it's on the stamper, and go from there. So that's what they're doing at quality assurance, listening, quality control. They're looking, they're visually inspecting, and they're also making sure they're not warped. And then again, those center labels aren't off kilter. There's a little matrix number, if you didn't know that, in the dead wax. If you can see that, it says it right there. And it says, this is the job number. Typically, who cut it is all scribed in there by hand. They can cross-check that against the side of the center label. So that's what they're looking for. And then lastly, before they actually pack it, they're sleeving the records. Every record gets a sleeve, whether it's a printed sleeve or a paper sleeve of some kind or polyline sleeve. So they're sleeving all those by hand after quality control. And then they're also cross-checking the print, which is the specialty print that comes in, and make sure there's no defects on the jackets or any printed materials, inserts, etc. Something's not glued incorrectly or folded incorrectly, and that they look good. The packaging is a huge piece of a finished good. Most people do not know what the record looks like inside because they don't have X-ray vision, but they do know what a good jacket looks like, right? So a really good jacket looks super cool. It's made correctly, doesn't have any issues with it. So that's a big selling point, and I believe all people kind of know that if they're working in this industry, but even if they don't, what looks coolest on the wall is typically not a record itself. It's going to be that jacket. So jacket, insert sleeves, sometimes OB strips, those can look super cool and just kind of help sell that because that's what people are seeing on the shelf. Printing has its own manufacturing. So we are not going to get into all the printing stuff today. We're going to get into that in a later episode because they have a whole world of cool stuff. And I don't want to rush to it because I want to spend a ton of time today just on the manufacturing. People that saw episode 1, I saw some notes. We had it on different platforms, so a bunch of different comments everywhere. Some of them got fed back to me that were, hey, we want to see a little bit more deeper dive into these processes. So I want to spend a lot of time on those first couple steps, which was just to recap last time, which is going to be the pre-master, then the cutting, to the plating, and then to the pressing operation itself. But that's all ahead of these next steps, which we'll get into in future episodes. I hope you guys are finding this informational. And if you have any questions, you can always post it. We're pretty good at getting back to everyone. And if you'd like to see something that we didn't show, you can hit us up for future episodes. Leave that in the comments as well. And we'll see if it's appropriate. We'll try to get to it. Appreciate your time. Bye-bye.